Well, the mainstream media seems to have forgotten about those two assassination attempts against President Trump's life, but we haven't forgotten. Joining me to discuss what he's now learning is Ken Silva. He's one of the great editors over at Headline USA. Ken, I want to thank you for being here. You guys have been covering this, probably the only outlet that's covering this at this point, going into all of the DOJ documents that are being dropped through the courts and kind of sifting through it and pulling out a lot of interesting information. You have a new piece up regarding the suspect, the second suspect, Ryan Roth. And he had an interaction with law enforcement 9 days prior to his arrest. So, what are you guys learning?
Yeah, thanks again for giving me the platform to talk about this. As you mentioned, not many people have been covering the developments of this alleged, Trump assassin. And so this news comes from a state arrest warrant that was actually issued in December when I guess the state figured out that the DOJ was going to get out of the way and they could pursue their own case. And not many people reported on the warrant, and it's got a lot of new information in there, including this previously unreported scoop about the fact that sheriff's deputies actually encountered Ruth on September 6th, which was just 9 days before he tried to kill Trump. And so the warrant says that Ruth had been basically camping out at a rest stop about 45 minutes away from Trump's Palm Beach golf course. And the sheriffs were called there because somebody's like, hey, this guy, I don't know if he's homeless or what. He's been at this truck stop for days. And they talked to him, and, that he just tells that I'm here temporarily. I'm just visiting. I've been staying here because it's like a shady spot in the daytime. The sheriffs go on about their day, and they only put two to two together 9 days later after Ruth is arrested. They go back to the truck stop and they find these cans of spam that were also in Ruth's car. So yeah, the warrant's interesting, but I guess the scandal here is that we know also from the warrant that Ruth had been using a stolen license plate since September 2nd. And so the question that people need to be asking, well, when the sheriffs did their check on Ruth, did they notice that he had a stolen what license plate? If so, did they do anything about it? And if not, why not? I mean, one case that immediately comes to mind is the like that a couple years ago where the feds pulled over that Kilmar Abrego, the Maryland man, and then the FBI ordered him to be let go. So I don't know if that's what happened here, but people need to be answering these or asking these kind of questions.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because ultimately Palm Beach, the sheriff's office would be able to give him some type of have to give him something in regards to that, right? Like a ticket or seize the car because stolen plates is actually a big deal, and all you need to do is probably just run those plates, and they would have found out. I mean, unless he stole a plate from a car that was identical to his, then yeah, I could see that being an issue. Do you have any details regarding the car details?
It was actually from a trucking company owned by someone named Pooja St. Louis, like an Indian lady. So it was registered in Florida, like a big rig truck. A quick running it through the database would have definitely shown that that was stolen.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's a great question that needs to be answered then, because I think that's deeply, deeply concerning. Uh, I just don't understand why it's taking so long. So, like you just detailed in the beginning of all of this, you said, and this was the big key point for the state, Florida, for example. Florida wanted answers. The DOJ wasn't giving them answers, and under the Biden regime, they were in fact blocking the state from launching their own investigation into all of this. Do you have any, let's just say, assumptions as to why the Biden regime was stopping the state of Florida from investigating what actually took place here?
I could only imagine that politics are at play because, the Biden administration worked hand in glove with Pennsylvania state government after the Butler shooting, which is, of course, Pennsylvania was run by a possible presidential contender, Josh Shapiro. So the state police and the FBI were much more in concert with that. And then, of course, under DeSantis, I guess the feds and the staties just don't get along if we're going to, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ken, I want to ask you too, 'cause in case our audience wasn't here for the first time we had you on the program, we detailed how this suspect was able to obtain a lot of different or was looking to obtain a lot of different expensive things. Like, was looking to traffic a family from Afghanistan into the United States. It was communicating allegedly with human traffickers. Was also looking to buy weapons as well. But I mean, you're detailing how he was in a truck stop, just kind of like living in his car eating spam, which is obviously disgusting. But he doesn't sound like he has a lot of money. Have you learned anything else regarding the finances and how he was able to kind of pretend like he had a lot of money, or was like what he was going to do with, like, how does he even have the finances to back up his plans to bring a family in from Afghanistan, to purchase all these weapons, to fund his trip to West Palm? How did this even come about?
That's a great question. I think when we talked last time, I mentioned that he's, kind of a career criminal, but he's not a very
Mhm.
successful one. He's got over 200 arrests, so I don't think he's getting rich off of his crime. There is actually some interesting information in this Florida state arrest warrant that talks about his plane purchases. The tickets to Ukraine were funded by his fiance, a woman named Kathleen Schaefer, who was actually his co-author on that weird book that he self-published on Amazon. We don't know much about Kathleen Schaefer. Presumably, she's living in Hawaii. But the interesting thing is that she does have property in Hawaii, and she's also a local news outlet in Missouri found out that they have property in St. Louis too, which is bizarre. And of course, Ruth had property in Greensboro, North Carolina. So he definitely has some assets. But if I were, an investigator, I would be looking at this Kathleen Schaefer lady. It's hard to find out much about her on Google because that's such a common name. But
Yeah.
that's the people need to be looking at, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it'd be interesting to look into that. And I also want to ask you, because I know earlier this week as well, there was a hearing in regards to what evidence is going to be presented at his trial. What stood out to you during all of that, and what should the American people be on high alert about?
Yeah, not much was settled yesterday. Basically, the parties showed up and made their arguments, and Judge Eileen Cannon is reserving her decision for a later date. Basically, they're arguing over what gets to be presented over the jury. Some of the stuff that we've been talking about, his text messages with this Mexican human smuggler named Ramiro, his attempts to buy a rocket launcher, also his 2002 WMD convictions for having a machine gun and some explosives. Prosecutors say they should be able to show that to the jury just to show his violent history of, handling weapons, and that he was a convicted felon. He knows he wasn't supposed to have a gun when he was on the golf course in September. Uh, so not much came out of the hearing, but the parties did agree that his 2010 convictions for handling stolen goods, that will not be presented to a jury. For the purposes of the criminal trial, I guess they agree that that would prejudice a jury. It doesn't really have much to do with the case. However, I do have a story that we're publishing today that I'm really excited to share with your viewers first about these 2010 convictions. And even though they're not going to be presented to a jury, they're of immense public interest, in my opinion. I've dug up a Greensboro police report from these 2010 incident where Ruth was found with thousands of dollars of stolen merchandise. And it turns out that he was actually running a real criminal enterprise. So people know that he had a roofing company. He was into construction. He employed illegal immigrants, and he would go, the sites he would work on, he would later have criminals go back to those sites and like rip out the copper wire, steal stuff, and bring it back to his warehouses, where then he would presumably uh, either repurpose it or sell it for money. And this report also identifies one of his accomplices in this scheme, a guy named Marty. The report talks about how he would go to these construction sites, steal stuff, give it to Ryan Ruth for money, and then turn around and use that to buy crack cocaine. Um, the interesting thing about Marty is he's identified as Marshall Hinshaw, and you could find him on LinkedIn. And according to his LinkedIn, he worked for the Defense Department. I don't know the significance of that, but when we're talking about Ruth's ties to the military and him being in North Carolina, close to Fort Bragg, that's something of significance to note. I would think. I will. The last thing I'll say about it is that Marty's currently incarcerated in a low security prison. Seems like he was in and out of jail ever since he knew Ruth. I've written him trying to get more information if he wants to talk about Ryan. I really don't expect him to answer the letter though.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine he'd probably want to keep that hush hush for now. But whatever happened to that case, what was the end result of that police report?
Well, yeah, and so thank you for asking that because that's actually the punchline. After all of that, the police they have confidential informants spying on Ryan for months. They execute a search warrant on one of his warehouses, and the informant tells the police that well now Ryan's panicking and he's moving all the stolen goods from his other warehouses and trailers, trying to hide the stuff. They get another search warrant in February 2010, find a bunch of stolen welding equipment. They interviewed the owner of a warehouse that Ryan was using, and the owner said that he tried to get Ryan to move the stuff, and somebody pulled a knife on him. Like, really, just violent, criminal, brazenly criminal behavior. And after all that, he gets probation, which he had already had felony convictions for possessing explosives. So not only does he get probation, he triggers a violation of his probation for the previous convictions, but that just gets tossed out immediately. They said it was a mistake. So he might have served maybe 1 day in jail for it when he was booked, but he just went on to continue, being a criminal until, last September when the gig was up.
Yeah, Ken, I think it's funny that we continuously see individuals who are accused of crimes like this. It's never their first run in with law enforcement, right? There's always some type of extensive background where law enforcement either knew something or they suddenly struck a strange plea agreement. And so that doesn't really strike me as odd from that angle because it's a common theme, of course. Ken, I want to thank you for everything that you're doing and digging into this because there's not many people who are doing just that. So, to our audience, you got to head over to headlineusa.com. You could read that story later on this evening that Ken just detailed that he is releasing soon. So make sure you do just that. Ken, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it for the update. One of the best parts about being an independent journalist has to be the fact that I get to handpick our sponsors for this show. It is an honor to do just that. And that's why I am so thrilled to partner with FernValleySoaps.com because, folks, they believe in the same things you and I believe in. They are a goat milk based product line based in California, and they create products like soap bars and lotions. They just recently launched this one. It's the Amber Alert soap bar, and 100% of the profits are going towards fighting human trafficking. That's something that we cover on this show constantly. You know I'm very passionate about that. So head on over right now to fernvalleysoaps.com. Take a look around. They have so many incredible products that you probably didn't know that they have. And folks, everyone who buys from them can't stop bragging about them. I know I use their products. I love their products and they smell and look amazing. So head on over to fernvalleysoaps.com. And just because you're listening to today's show, you're going to get a discount of 20% off when you use that promo code BRE. That's promo code BRE at checkout. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. I am a big fan. I use this every single day. Their handmade goat milk lotion. It's incredible. It's not sticky, but it is great. So head on over to fernvalleysoaps.com. Take a look around. Use code BREATHE. That's promo code BRE to save 20%. And the more you buy, the more you save. So again, folks, fernvalleysoaps.com, promo code BREATHE.